The words hit the warm October air of the Hargrove Grand Hotel Valet Circle like a slap. 40 people stood within earshot. The evening sky above downtown Atlanta had gone amber and deep purple, the kind of sky that makes a city look like it is lit from within, and not one of those 40 people moved. Not one of them breathed loud enough to matter. A man in a crisp burgundy valet uniform stood perfectly still beside a silver Bentley Continental, a set of keys in his left hand, his expression as undisturbed as the surface of still water. He had just been spat upon. The man in the Italian suit, gold cufflinks, $3,000 shoes, a tan that came from somewhere that required a passport, had leaned forward, deliberately, and let it land directly on the valet's left shoe. Not an accident. A pronouncement. And the valet, this quiet man with silver at his temples and careful, practiced hands, simply looked up and said, "Good evening, sir." That was all. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He did not blink. He had no idea. The man in the Italian suit had absolutely no idea who was standing in front of him. In 38 minutes, 6 black SUVs were going to pull into this exact circle. And the most powerful man in American technology was going to walk across this same pavement and hand this valet a set of keys. Let me take you back 4 hours earlier. Marcus Elijah Webb had been waking up at 4:45 in the morning for 31 years. Not because anyone made him, because that was the hour his father taught him the day truly belonged to a man, before the world remembered it needed something from you. He rose in the dark each morning, started a pot of coffee, and sat for 15 minutes at the small kitchen table of his apartment on Westlake Drive. A clean place, deliberate, every object chosen with care, a framed photograph of a church choir on one wall, a shelf of books, every spine facing out, every one of them read at least twice. And on the corner of the table, resting in a worn leather pouch the color of dark honey, a single brass pocket watch, old and heavy and serious feeling in the hand, initials pressed deep into the case, ERW Elijah Raymond Webb. His father's watch. Marcus had carried that watch every single day for 22 years. It lost about 4 minutes a week, and he had long since adjusted for it automatically, the way you account for the habits of someone you have loved long enough to stop correcting. He carried it because the morning he left for his first real job, his father had pressed it into his palm and said, "Every minute you spend with dignity is a minute no one can ever take back from you." Marcus had been 24 years old. His father had been dying, though neither of them knew it yet. He found out 6 weeks later. The watch went into the left breast pocket of his uniform every morning, right over his heart. That was the routine. That had always been the routine. He had not missed it once. The Hargrove Grand was not the kind of hotel that needed to advertise. A standard room began at $1,800 a night. Its clientele were people who were quietly disappointed when they were recognized in public, because it meant the staff had been insufficiently discreet. Senators had proposed legislation in those suites. Hedge fund managers kept standing reservations they used 4 times a year just to have them. The valet circle at the entrance was, in the truest sense, the border between that world and everything outside it. Marcus had worked that circle for 11 years. He was good at his job in the way that quiet, serious men are good at things, not with performance, not with flair, but with a deep reliability that guests felt without being able to name it. He knew every regular car. He knew which guests wanted their keys back in silence, and which ones wanted 30 seconds of conversation. He knew the weight of July air on leather interiors, and he would crack a window on the Bentleys before pulling them around, just enough to let the heat breathe out. The other valets on the evening rotation, 5 of them, called him Chief, not sarcastically, with the particular respect that younger men give to someone who has never once complained about anything he wasn't also prepared to fix. The evening of October the 14th began like every other Thursday. The first cars arrived at 5:15 for the hotel's quarterly investor dinner. 3rd floor, invitation only, the kind of event where the food costs less than the wine, and the wine costs less than what is being decided between courses. By 6, the circle was moving smoothly. A Rolls-Royce Phantom. A cream Mercedes. A Range Rover with diplomatic plates. Marcus processed them with the unhurried efficiency of a man who has done something so many times it has become a kind of prayer. He was handing off a navigator when the silver Bentley Continental arrived. The driver stepped out without looking at Marcus. Preston Harlow Whitfield III. Private equity. The kind of name that appeared in the thank you sections of political fundraiser programs and occasionally in the footnotes of SEC filings in ways that required attorneys to explain. Mid-50s. Suit cut specifically for his body, in fabric that made other suits look like they were apologizing. He extended the keys in Marcus's general direction without lifting his gaze from his phone, the way you set something down on a counter without checking if the surface is there. Marcus caught them cleanly. "Good evening, sir. Welcome back to the Hargrove. I'll have your vehicle." "Skip it," Whitfield said, still looking at the phone. "Don't park it next to anything domestic. And not underground. It smelled like exhaust last time." "East deck, sir." "Of course." Marcus moved the car. He noted the left rear tire was 4 PSY underspec and flagged it on the retrieval sheet because that was the kind of man he was. He would mention it when the car came back. Even then, what happened at 7:48, Marcus would later describe to his daughter with the same careful evenness he brought to everything. Whitfield had come back outside with a second drink, loosened by the evening's negotiations, which had apparently gone his way. A small group lingered near the entrance, guests catching air, glasses in hand. Marcus was bringing up an Escalade for a departing guest, when Whitfield found him with his eyes. When the guest was gone, Whitfield said loudly enough, "Hey, you, what's your name?" "Marcus, sir." "Marcus. You scratched my car earlier?" The pause that followed was the length of a man fitting an accusation against available facts. "No, sir. Your vehicle is untouched. I can take you directly to it to inspect. I'm not asking you to take me anywhere." 2 steps forward, the voice dropping in the way that is somehow louder than a shout. "I'm asking if you scratched it. Simple question for a simple job." "There is no scratch on your vehicle, sir." "People like you," Whitfield said, and the phrase carried in it the full weight of everything it had ever meant anywhere it had ever been said, "just don't have the care for this kind of thing. It's not your fault. It's just not what your kind is built for." Then he stepped forward one final time, and he spat directly onto Marcus's left shoe, the brass-buckled, perfectly polished left shoe. The shoe Marcus had shined that morning at 4:58. In the 15 minutes his father had always said were the truest ones. And then came the line. The one that was already, without anyone knowing it yet, beginning its journey toward a trending hashtag and 47 news articles and a mayor's statement. "Wipe that off your face and get back in your box, boy." Marcus looked at him. His expression did not change. His voice, when it came, was the same register it had been all evening. Even deliberate, the way a river is calm over depth. "Good evening, sir." Whitfield stared for a moment. Then he turned and walked back inside, and the silence that followed rang. Nobody spoke. Not the 4 guests near the entrance. Not the arriving couple who had frozen on the steps. Not the 2 valets who had seen it from 40 feet away. Just silence, and the amber sky, and Marcus, who reached into his breast pocket and closed his hand around the watch. Not in anger. Not for comfort exactly. The way a man touches something true when the world around him is deciding whether to tell the truth. But what Preston Whitfield did not know, the thing that would undo him, that he had made impossible for himself to know by never once fully looking at the man he had decided to diminish, was 2 things. The first was the phone. A woman named Claudette Osei, arriving for the dinner, had raised her phone when she saw the pointed finger and understood in one beat that she was watching something that needed a witness. She had 22,000 followers on Instagram. She posted the video at 8:02 with a caption that read simply, "This just happened at the Hargrove Grand." The man in the uniform is a person. His name is Marcus. By 8:15 it had been shared 400 times. By morning it would be at 3 million. The second thing Whitfield didn't know was Marcus's son. For 6 years in the 90s, Marcus had run a specialty automotive shop called Webb & Son. Restoration work, collector cars, the kind of machinery other shops refused because they lacked the fluency for it. He had rebuilt Ferrari engines from bare components. He had rewired a 1967 Shelby GT 500 that had sat in a barn for 19 years and now lived in a museum in Los Angeles. He had a gift for cars that went beyond any training he had ever received. It was closer to a native language, the way certain people are simply born into the grammar of mechanical things. The shop had been his father's dream first and Marcus's inheritance second, and for a time it had been enough. When the diagnosis came, a Tuesday in autumn, the light falling a particular way through the shop windows that Marcus would never afterward be able to separate from the word malignant, everything else became secondary. Not dramatically, quietly, the way the important things in a man's life always rearrange themselves around the most important thing. Marcus closed the shop 14 months later, after the second surgery, after the money had been spent. $114,000. His savings and his father's savings combined, every dollar of it. Treatments that bought Elijah 8 more months. 8 months Marcus never once regretted, not for a single hour. His father lived long enough to meet Marcus's daughter Imani, who was 3 years old and already precise in the way she observed things, already her grandfather's granddaughter. He held the watch one more time. He died on a Sunday morning in a hospital room while Marcus held his hand and did not let go. Dominic Webb had been 11 years old for most of that. He had watched his father close the shop, adjust, keep moving, never stop. He had left Atlanta at 18 on a partial scholarship to Georgia Tech, worked 3 jobs through his undergraduate years, turned down his first acquisition offer at 26, and taken his company public at 31. He was 36 years old now. His net worth, per the most recent Forbes estimate, was $3. $4 billion. He kept no social media, gave no interviews, drove himself to most meetings. He had a habit of attending events without advance announcement, arriving late, leaving without ceremony. He liked knowing how he was treated when no one knew who he was. He had been on the fourth floor of the Hargrove since 5 o'clock, finalizing an acquisition discussion. He stepped into the elevator at 8:07. He did not yet know about the Valet circle. 6 SUVs pulled in at 8:15, quiet and deliberate. The small crowd near the entrance watched them the way powerful people watch other displays of power, with calibrating attention. Whitfield, back outside with his second glass, was among them. The lead door opened. Dominic Webb stepped out. Gray blazer, white shirt, nothing to prove. He scanned the circle and then he saw his father. He crossed to him directly. The two men embraced in the unhurried way of people who have loved each other across years and loss and distance. "Hey, Pop, you're 7 minutes late. Traffic on 285. They stepped back. It took Dominic 4 seconds to see the left shoe. He looked at it. He looked at Marcus's face. Marcus shook his head slightly. "Not now. I'm fine." Dominic held his gaze for 1 more second. Then he turned. He walked directly to Whitfield. He stopped 2 feet away. He said quietly, the kind of quiet that made people lean in from 20 feet. "I understand you spoke to my father this evening." Whitfield's expression moved through several phases in rapid sequence. Confusion, recognition of the SUVs and the demeanor, a recalibration attempt that was already failing. "I'm sorry, you're Marcus Webb." Dominic glanced toward his father. "The man you spat on." The color left Whitfield's face in one movement, the way a shade is pulled, not gradually, gone. 2 Meridian partners who had come out to meet Dominic exchanged a look that contained, in compressed form, considerable legal consequence. Dominic reached into his jacket pocket and produced a set of keys. His own keys for the Escalade he had arrived in. He held them out to his father. Marcus took them. That was the moment, not a speech, not a confrontation. A son handing his father a set of keys in front of the man who had decided his father was worth spitting on. The gesture was worth more than anything words could carry. Dominic made 3 phone calls from the east deck, standing beside his father's car with Marcus next to him. His general counsel, the Meridian managing partner, and Adrian Cole, a civil rights attorney in Atlanta, who picked up on the second ring and listened without interrupting for 4 minutes. By 9 o'clock, the word had moved through the investor dinner. By 9:30, 2 of Whitfield's own co-investors had gathered their things quietly. By 10, the Hargrove's general manager had requested a meeting with Preston Whitfield that was notably brief. Whitfield Capital Management issued a statement the following Monday describing his behavior as inconsistent with firm values and announcing his transition to a strategic advisory role. This is the language that means he is gone, and we cannot afford the word fired. The equity partners meeting that preceded the statement lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes and was attended by attorneys. It was considerably less diplomatic than the statement. The video reached 9 million views in 40 hours. The phrase, "back in your box, boy," became the subject of dozens of news segments, a mayoral statement, a segment on 3 separate national morning shows, and a moment of genuine, uncomfortable national conversation about the specific cruelty of diminishment. Not the cruelty of violence, but the cruelty of a category. The act of deciding that a man's uniform is the fullest description of who he is. Claudette Ozé was invited onto 3 different podcasts. She declined all of them. She said the story wasn't about her. She was right, and she knew it. And that is exactly the kind of person who deserves to have 22,000 followers. The Hargrove Grand conducted an internal review of its valet operations that resulted in updated guest conduct policies, language that had not existed before October 14th. New signs, new protocols. Patricia Osei was asked to help draft them. She did. Adrian Cole filed the civil complaint 11 days after the incident. It settled 4 months after that. Confidential terms, described by legal observers as significant. A word that, in civil settlements, covers an enormous range of life-changing. Marcus did not miss a single shift during the proceedings. Not one. The Hargrove's ownership called Patricia Osei into a meeting within 2 weeks and informed her they were creating a formal shift lead position, a position she would later note that should have existed years earlier, and that Marcus Webb had been recommended for it by multiple parties, internal and external. Patricia walked back to the valet station, stood beside Marcus while he finished logging a retrieval, and said, "Monday. New title. Same parking spots." He told her he'd need new business cards. She said she'd order them herself, and she did, and they arrived on a Friday, and he put them in his shirt pocket next to the watch. 1 year later, a small clinic opened in the West End. Free automotive training for young men between 16 and 24 who had been through the juvenile justice system. Basic maintenance, electrical diagnostics, restoration fundamentals. The funding came from the Elijah Webb Foundation, named for a man who had believed that every minute spent with dignity was a minute that could not be reclaimed by anyone else. The lead instructor worked 2 mornings a week. He did not take a salary. He parked on the street, walked in at 7, stayed until noon, went to his afternoon shift at the Hargrove. On the wall behind his workbench, in plain dark wood, was a photograph of his father in the original shop, hands dark with grease, grinning at the camera on a Tuesday morning in 1991. On the shelf beside it, on a small stand made from reclaimed oak, sat a brass pocket watch. ERW, it lost 4 minutes a week. Imani Webb came to the opening. She stood beside her father and said, "Granddad would have had a lot to say about all this." Marcus said, "He already said it." She asked what he meant. He took the watch out of his pocket, turned it over in the light, and put it back. 15 minutes, he said. That's all he ever told me was really mine. Spend those right, and the rest of the day has a foundation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's why you wake up at 4:45. He smiled. 4:45 plus 15 is 5 o'clock sharp. They walked inside together, the door closing behind them. If this moved you, share it. Pass it to someone who needs to hear it. Like subscribe, hit the bell so you never miss what we put out. And tell me this. Have you ever been in a room where someone was treated as less than they were, and you stayed quiet? Not because you wanted to, just because the moment moved too fast or you told yourself it wasn't your place? What would you do differently now? Here's what really gets me about this story. It's not the reversal. It's not the SUVs or the moment Dominic handed his father the keys, as perfect as that moment was. What gets me is the watch. A brass pocket watch, losing 4 minutes a week, and a man adjusting for it every single day for 22 years without complaint. Think about what that means. To carry something that isn't quite right and make the correction yourself quietly, every morning with no audience. That is not a metaphor. That is what dignity actually looks like from the inside. Not the absence of pain, not the absence of injustice. The decision, made daily, privately, without applause, to keep moving with the weight of who you come from held close to your chest. Preston Whitfield saw a uniform. He saw a category. He acted on it. And the thing that destroyed him, the thing he had made it impossible for himself to prepare for, was that the man in the uniform had never once needed Whitfield's perception to know his own worth. So here's my question, and I mean it honestly. Where in your ordinary life do you let someone else's category tell you what you are worth? Not in the dramatic moment, in the Tuesday morning, the meeting where no one asks your opinion, the promotion that goes to someone else, the parking structure, the waiting room. What do you carry that keeps you accurate about who you are, even when the world around you is running 4 minutes slow? Leave it below. I read everyone.